What happens when we die? This is a question that has puzzled humanity for centuries. But what if someone had been there and come back to tell the tale? This is the story of Philip Sheppard, a man who died, met a divine being, and returned with a message that could change the way we think about faith and love. On September 27, 1986, Philip Sheppard participated in a 150-mile charity bicycle ride from Corpus Christi to San Antonio, Texas. The ride, sponsored by a hospital, was in memory of a woman who had passed away from kidney failure. Little did Philip know that this ride would change his life forever. The morning was hot, with dry weather approaching from the north, promising a relentless headwind for the riders. As the 300 cyclists left Corpus Christi, Philip immediately sprinted to the front of the group, determined to push himself to the limit. About 45 miles into the ride, disaster struck. Philip suffered a flat tire and struggled to change it. By the time he was back on the road, he had fallen far behind the main group. The crew in a support vehicle warned him that he might have to end his ride unless he could catch up to the other cyclists, who were now about 4 miles ahead. Determined not to give up, Philip rode as hard as he could. But the odds were stacked against him. The wind had shifted, and now he had to face its full force alone without the protection of riding in a group. The temperature was soaring, reaching around 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite his best efforts, Philip couldn't catch up. About 65 miles into the ride, the crew forced him to stop under a bridge. As the adrenaline left his system, Philip realized he was in trouble. His body was shutting down, and it felt like his vital organs were failing. 3 nurses with the crew noticed how rapidly Philip was deteriorating. They suggested to another cyclist to help him keep moving, but it was too late. Philip was getting dizzy, and he fell to the ground. As he lay there, looking up at the beautiful blue sky with its patchy cumulus clouds, Philip had a surprising thought. He wasn't afraid. In fact, he felt relieved. Despite his involvement in charitable activities, Philip had secretly felt that the world was a cruel place, and he was glad to finally leave it behind. What happened next defied Philip's expectations. Instead of losing consciousness and ceasing to exist, he felt his awareness expand. It was as if he had gained a super consciousness, similar to what he had observed in his past experiences with deceased people who had contacted him. Philip's experience was bizarre and hard to describe. He felt as if his entire being had been scattered across the universe, up, down, sideways. These words lost all meaning. He was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Strangely, Philip wasn't terrified by this experience. Instead, he found it blissful. He was witnessing what seemed like miracles unfolding around him, marveling at the complexity of it all. Philip tried to make sense of his experience using concepts from quantum physics. It felt as if his body had become entangled between 2 points. Point A, where his physical body lay, and point B, where his spiritual body now resided. His composition seemed to have fallen apart, becoming an infinite amount of vibrational string frequencies that transformed into particles of matter when interacted with by an unknown force. Throughout this experience, Philip couldn't see, talk, or move, but he wasn't concerned. He felt that his condition was temporary, and that he just needed time to adjust to this new, beautiful, and peaceful realm. As Philip floated in this state of superconsciousness, he sensed a presence. Not just one, but many. These beings surrounded him with an overwhelming sense of unconditional love and concern. Philip couldn't see or speak to these entities, but he could feel them. It felt like coming home to a family he didn't even know he had. Just when Philip thought the experience couldn't get any more profound, the loving creatures suddenly withdrew and began to bow down. They were watching a great royal figure approaching them. This perfected royal figure came within an inch of Philip's face and smiled at him with the same concern a parent would have for their child after an accident. Philip couldn't see, hear, smell, or taste, but his feelings returned. The royal figure communicated a message to him, not with words, but in a way Philip could clearly understand. "My child, why are you here? It's not your time. I have to send you back." The royal figure then gave Philip some advice that would change his life. "Don't be afraid when you return to Earth. If you make mistakes, just live your life the best way you can. Try to show unconditional love for the people you meet, the same way my subjects showed their love for you. Don't be afraid if people believe in me or not. Just have faith that anyone you meet will be touched in some way by your experience. Let me handle the difficult job of judging people if needed. This message was mind-blowing. The divine being wasn't concerned about belief. It didn't demand that everyone believe in it. Instead, it emphasized unconditional love and acceptance. The royal figure sensed Philip's concerns and added, "Don't be afraid." It seemed to know that returning to Earth, facing life again after experiencing such perfection, would be challenging. But it reassured Philip that making mistakes was okay, that living life to the best of his abilities was enough. After delivering this profound message, the royal figure gently picked up Philip and took him back to his body. The journey back felt peaceful, like floating through the cosmos. It seemed as if they traveled billions of light years, passing through the atmosphere, past the cumulus clouds, and finally back to Philip's body under the bridge in Texas. As Philip regained consciousness, he heard the nurses frantically working to save his life. "I can't get his pulse. He has no pulse. Oh wait, he has a pulse now," one of them exclaimed. Philip kept drifting in and out of consciousness. He was shivering uncontrollably from the cold wind, but he kept smiling. He knew he wasn't going to die again because it wasn't his time to go. When they were less than 10 miles away from their destination, everyone insisted that Philip get on his bike and finish the ride. They thought he'd be upset if he didn't complete it. But for Philip, the physical ride paled in comparison to the spiritual journey he had just experienced. Returning to regular life after such an experience wasn't easy for Philip. The world seemed mundane compared to the glimpse of eternity he had experienced, but he came back with a mission: to show unconditional love to everyone he met, just as the royal figure had instructed. This new purpose wasn't always easy to fulfill. People can be difficult, frustrating, even mean sometimes. But whenever Philip was tempted to judge someone or write them off, he remembered his otherworldly experience and the message he had received. Before this experience, Philip had considered himself a strange Christian. He had never really understood why, but he had an atheistic frame of mind during the process of his death. He had fully expected to lose consciousness and cease to exist. But that's not what happened at all. This experience challenged everything Philip thought he knew about life, death, and faith. It showed him that there's so much more to existence than what we can see and touch in our everyday lives. But it also showed him that what we do in our everyday lives matters immensely. Every interaction, every moment of kindness or love ripples out into the universe in ways we can't even comprehend. Years have passed since that fateful day in 1986, but Philip is still processing what happened. He's still learning from it, still trying to live up to the message he was given. Some days are easier than others. Some days, that unconditional love flows freely. Other days, it's a struggle. But that's okay. Philip remembers what the royal figure told him. If you make mistakes, just live your life the best way you can. How can we apply this message of unconditional love in our daily lives? It's one thing to hear about it, but quite another to put it into practice. Philip found several ways to integrate this profound lesson into everyday life: practicing empathy, listening more and speaking less, forgiving quickly, showing kindness to strangers, accepting differences, being patient, and starting with self-love. Philip found that by focusing on these practices, he was able to gradually transform his interactions with others. He noticed that as he became more accepting and loving, people around him often responded in kind. It wasn't always easy, and there were plenty of setbacks along the way, but the overall trajectory was towards more understanding and compassion. One particularly challenging aspect was dealing with those who held beliefs or values very different from his own. Philip realized that loving unconditionally didn't mean agreeing with everyone or condoning harmful actions. Instead, it meant recognizing the inherent worth and humanity in every person, even those he strongly disagreed with. This approach led to some surprising outcomes. Philip found that he was able to have meaningful conversations with people he previously would have avoided or argued with. By approaching these interactions with an open heart and a genuine desire to understand, he often found common ground where he least expected it. Of course, living this way isn't always easy. There are days when it feels impossible to love unconditionally, when the weight of the world's problems seems too heavy to bear. But in those moments, Philip remembers the peace and love he experienced during his near-death experience. He recalls the words of the divine being, reminding him that it's not about being perfect, but about trying our best. As we reflect on Philip's extraordinary experience, we're left with a powerful question. How would your life change if you committed to practicing unconditional love starting today? The challenge is clear, but the rewards could be transformative, not just for you, but for everyone whose life you touch. Are you ready to take that step? If this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video, spread the word, and let's start a revolution of love. Together we can create a world that's a little closer to the heaven Philip experienced, one act of unconditional love at a time.